over 15 years, I taught a class on social media and impact on children and adolescents. And this class is, this is a semester class. Therefore, we had about 15 weeks each week. Can you imagine that? Each week, we will discuss one outlet of social media. One week was lyrics. One week would be music itself, heavy metal versus rock and all of that. One week would be advertisement. I mean, every single chapter in this book that I taught to my students, and it was a very popular class too.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Wellness at the Speed of Light podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Stefano Sinacropi, and I'm very excited about today's episode with Dr. Nicole Jafari, who is a wonderful human being dedicated really to making the world a better place. She has a doctorate in education, but specializes specifically in behavioral and developmental psychology. She is an associate professor at the Chicago School of Professional Psychology, teaching pre-doctoral students everything from child development all the way through the entire life cycle, cultural issues. She actually has a course on dealing with mass media that we dive into on today's episode. She is widely published in many prestigious scientific journals. She has written scholarly books, which are often cited. She shares her insights on everything from human development, including the prenatal period, adulthood, childhood, adolescence, families in today's multicultural society, and is really a wonderful leader and teacher in all of these areas. And I've immensely enjoyed our discussion together, which covered topics ranging from social media addiction to our relationship with mass media, when children should be exposed to electronic devices, and how we can be better parents in managing that, but then also how we can be better as individuals at any point in our lives at dealing with the bombardment that we get from everywhere in the media. We talked about all types of mental health issues, cultural issues. We discussed her incredible journey from Iran to the United States, where she was originally an engineer, had jobs here in the United States, but then fell in love with children's education. And from there, because of her very strong interest in psychology, she ended up as a professor in the fields of psychology, education, all types of stuff. It's just really, really amazing. I hope you really enjoy this episode where we cover so many very, very relevant topics in today's fast-paced society, where we need to really slow down and think about how we are going to move forward in a way that does not destroy our mental health. So on that note, let's dive right in with Dr. Jafari, and I really hope you enjoy this episode on Wellness at the Speed of Light. Hey, everyone, and welcome back to Wellness at the Speed of Light podcast. So excited today to have Dr. Nicole Jafari on the program to talk about everything from education to mental health to cross-cultural issues. And I think I personally am excited to learn so much from her as I've read through her work. Watch some of the things that she does. She's so passionate about making the world a better place, and I'm really honored and privileged to have her on the program today. And on that note, Dr. Jafari, I'd like to ask you, how did you even get into this current space? What really kind of stimulated you to want to get into education and psychology and just helping people with, how do I say it, their troubles?
Well, thank you, first of all, for having me. I'm really excited to be on your program, and I know you're doing good things. So I'm happy to be part of that. You really asked a very sort of deep question, because the answer to that is two-part. First of all, I did not start my career in the field of developmental psychology. As I started my career as an engineer, to be honest, because I was born and raised until, I was in finished high school in Iran and before revolution. And my only goal in life was to become an engineer like my dad. And so right after high school, because I was somewhat of a rebellious teenager, I felt that I wanted to pursue my engineering career elsewhere, mainly United States of America, because at that time, that's where the industry and the technology was happening. And eventually, through a lot of upheaval and stop in France for a year to go to school there, and then I didn't like it, I found myself in Chicago, going to school there and earning my engineering degree, industrial engineering or manufacturing engineering. This was in mid 80s. And I eventually wanted to get out of Chicago. By then, revolution had taken place in Iran, and there was no place for me to go back, because all women were being sort of fired from their jobs, and women had no place in the industry. So I couldn't go back. So I found myself in California. And in California was in the mid 80s. Those of your listeners who are in my age group, which stay nameless or numberless, remember that in mid 80s, California was a haven for manufacturing. This is before outsourcing and us going to Mexico or Taiwan or China. So I found myself being offered many, many positions. So I did that for about 17, 18 years. And in the process, I got married, and we had a couple of children. The second child being born, at that time, I had my MBA. I was really successful in my field, because this was the time of equal opportunity employment situation, and most Fortune 500 companies did not have enough female in their technical positions. So I was in good situation. My last job was with Black & Decker, and I was in charge of several plants at that time. But motherhood, with the second child being an infant, motherhood and being an executive in manufacturing corporation mainly, wasn't working out anymore. And my husband was very successful in his business. So we decided that I was going to stay home with the kids. Well, that only lasted a couple of years, because, for someone like me who was dealing and wheeling and constantly traveling, wasn't really easy to be a parent. And that sort of started a time of reflection for me. So make the long story short, I wanted to do something different with my life. And I remember Black & Decker at that time, my boss called me after 2 years and said, Nicole, have you had enough? Do you want to come back? We need you. And I set foot in that office thinking, well, I might come back. I set foot in that office. And even after talking with him about my new position, which I thought, it's not going to be full time, I came home and I told my husband, I can't do it. I cannot go back to corporate. I did it. I'm proud of it. I loved it. I can't do it anymore. So that started my whole, new world of exploration. And I happened to sort of volunteer on my daughter's preschool at that time. And I thought, wait a minute, the world of children is really fascinating. So I decided to go back to school and pursue my doctoral in education at that time. It wasn't easy, because I had a technical background with management, degrees, and I had to take a lot of classes. So I started teaching within a year of my doctoral program. As you know, we call people who candidate for PhD. We call them all but dissertation, which enabled me to start teaching at Cal State Long Beach, right here in California. And I fell into developmental psych. So at the end of the story is that for the past 24 years, I've been teaching developmental psychology, and for the past 2 years, because I eventually retired myself from State University, only dedicating my time now to teaching at a private school, the Chicago School of Professional Psychology. I'm an associate professor there. I teach clinical psych. And I'm putting all those years of, undergrad and graduate school teaching to good use. That's how I got into it. You might call it chance, you might call it passion, you might call it just at the end of the exploration.
I love hearing people's stories about how they come about finding their passion and life. And I know how passionate you are about these topics, the children, the looking at generation. But I know you're cross-generational. I mean, from, and not just that, but from, from birth to death, and have become an expert, in all those things. And one of the reasons that I was super excited about having you on the show, and we talked about this a little bit before the program, was as a surgeon who just has treated thousands and thousands of patients. One of the things for me that was really missing, especially early on, was this idea of really understanding how people's mental health affected what we were trying to do as physicians to their bodies because of what was going on with their minds. But one of the things I really like, it just didn't, people would talk to me about it, but I didn't really understand it, was even childhood traumas or traumas that had undergone, vets that had come back and had some horrible thing happen, or women that had stuff done to them when they were children, all kinds of issues. And people would bring them up to me. And honestly, I really wasn't tying it into the way that I treated them, the decisions I made, just say, hey, is this the right person to go down this path, or should we put them down the other path? And now that I've had a lot more opportunity to speak to experts like yourself, it is becoming so much more clear to me how important for us as physicians, even if we don't get it in our training, to be really astute at picking up how traumas, mental health issues, and I don't mean like severe, like I don't think it's schizophrenia. I'm just talking about like people that have underlying PTSD from some trauma that happened to them 30 years ago, or trapped emotions and all these other terms that honestly, if you talked to me 2 years ago, I would have said, what's that? What's a trapped emotion? I have no idea. But now I do, because I talk to people like you, and I'm really excited. I'm really excited about it. So let's start with the basics. In your experience, because obviously the people you see, and you counsel, they not only have these issues, but obviously they also have medical problems too. How important is it for providers to have at least some rudimentary understanding of how to treat mental health in general, but also some of these other, like what we would consider as surgeons, more fluffy topics, which now I feel are super important, but you know how we are as surgeons. We're just like, that's just for somebody else's problem. How important do you think it is for at least us to at least have some basic education on PTSD, traumas, all these other things, as far as being good doctors and treating the patients appropriately?
Well, that is actually a pet peeve of mine, that I believe until we approach treatment and healing as a whole and in an integrative manner, we're not really treating anybody. We're just delaying, or we're just temporarily fixing something. I truly believe, in my years of academic teaching and in a practical practice of counseling, truly believe that if physicians, surgeons, psychologists, and psychiatrists, and even spiritual healers don't work together to help someone who is suffering with, from anything, or has challenges with depression or anxiety, we're really not addressing the whole person. One of the first thing I do when I have a new client, or periodically with my clients, is I always check with them about their physical health, their last visit to their doctor's office, the last test they've had. Or I may have some suggestions of my own. Have you had a full hormone panel or biomarkers test? What do they say? How's your libido level? How is your testosterone? I mean, how can I not know those things? And I'm not a physician, and I don't know how to read those tests. But when the physician runs the test and then talks about it with the patient, and my client comes to me, then I have a better understanding that, okay, then at least physically, I shouldn't be looking for anything other than, because if you have low level of serotonins, how do I know if this is a mental health situation or crisis, or is it because lack of exercise and nutritional, habits, or lack of sleep? If the adrenaline is low, how do I know whether this is because this person has a desk job, never really exercise, never gets out there? So it is very important. And I'm not sure what is delaying the process of becoming an integrative health, having an integrative health approach to healing and treating individuals. We know enough to want to go that way.
No, absolutely. I will, and everybody knows this because I talk about it openly. I will admit, several years ago, other than diet and nutrition, which I've always from the beginning been real, because I have so many obese patients. So I've been trying to help them for a long, long time. But other than that, I was admittedly nowhere near an integrative health specialist, right? I fixed scoliosis and all these other, problems, nerves and spinal cord and things like that. But now that, over the last 2 years, where I've made a massive transition into really thinking about integrative health and making sure that patients, even if I can't help them because I don't have the depth of expertise in some particular area, at least I've educated myself to the point where I at least can pick up the signs. Like just the rudimentary example, right? I'm a spine surgeon. Once I became much more of an expert in concussion, and I don't mean concussion where people are like severely concussed and whatever. We all know that. I'm an orthopedic surgeon by background, so I've covered sports events and stuff, so I know how to diagnose. But in a clinical setting, I would never look for concussion necessarily because it wasn't part of my thing. I am picking up people now 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. They clearly are concussed. They've seen a lot of people and no one's picked it up. PTSD, people are not sleeping well. They're having these recurrent, all these different things. I'm asking these questions until we start thinking in that integrative mentality. So now I have all these different buckets. And like you said, you mentioned the spiritual healer, the buckets are, the physical, the mental, the spiritual, energetic, and then the other. So I look at all those buckets for all. Now, listen, if a patient comes in, they're 22, they have a huge disc herniation, they can't walk. We're not going into a big holistic, diatribe. However, for those other people that are struggling, which is most people, to be honest with you, that come and see me, I really take a much more integrative approach on it. And again, I rely on experts like yourself. And so now I'm starting to refer people out to certain psychologists that I like and other people when I really think, man, this has never been addressed. And it's a shame because, in America, people love to go to the doctor, right? It's like a thing that we do. We like to go to doctors and have all this care, but yet sometimes that care doesn't lead to, any improvements. And so specifically thinking with more integrative health, I now look back, and I know you'll appreciate this, at some of patients that I've operated on, and I felt like I did a technically very well done surgery, and they ended up being my biggest disasters because they just didn't do well, and it led to all these other things. And in retrospect, I understand it was because I wasn't really taking into account some of their mental health issues. And yeah, they went back to their doctors and they were cleared. Oh, you're clear for surgery. Just go have surgery. Well, maybe we didn't address their opioid problem well enough. We didn't address their depression, which got worse. We didn't address their underlying PTSD, which then got worse. And so these are all things now that when I walk into a room, I think about it. But I want to go back to I know that you're a huge expert on traumas. A lot of the things that I'm not really good at are these people that have these traumas where they don't even know what is really bothering them, like these trapped traumas, trapped emotions, these things that are ruining their life and they don't even know what it is. And sometimes having to, speaking to somebody like yourself, it comes out. Can you talk about how you get that out of people, like those kind of trapped traumas, things that they just, or they don't even want to think about it and they're putting it away, but yet that is the result of them having all these other, downstream issues. How do you, as a clinician, kind of get that out of your clients?
Right. So I want to go back a little bit to what you said earlier, and that is, we're not into integrative medicine, and that's yes, I understand that, and you see it too. but the necessity to be thinking in that way, it's very important, because then it goes into what you mentioned later, which was trauma, and how I work with my patients. I once had a client that was on, when he came to me, it was a 23-year-old young man. He came to me, and he gave me, I always ask him for a list of meds, they're taking. And he said, well, when he gave them to me, I realized he was on 2 different antidepressant and 1 anti-anxiety and a bipolar medication. So as he's telling me all this, and I'm looking up all the side effects and the medication interaction between them, my my mind is just blowing up, like, oh my God, how is he even alive? And how is he not have had a heart attack or a stroke or something? So I asked him, well, what were you really diagnosed with? Because he came to me from a psychiatrist, right? And I said, well, I don't know. I said, well, my doctor said I have anxiety and I have depression. I said, well, you're on bipolar medication. Did he diagnose you with bipolar? And he said, well, I don't know. I said, well, okay. Before I start working with you, I need you to go back to your doctor and I need you to ask just a few questions. And I gave him the list of questions. I said, one, why am I taking all these medications? What is the purpose? What am I diagnosed with? And what about the interaction and the side effects of these medications? And I made him promise me that he would do that, because I said, I cannot continue with you until I know the answers to these questions. He came back about 10 days later. And the first thing he said, now my doctor got mad that you were asking these questions. I said, well, I'm sorry he got mad, but did you explain to him? I said, yeah, but he said that she should be, concerning herself with what she's taking. This is, my diagnosis. So you can realize now how important it is for me to know what this person is dealing with. And then when it comes to trauma, of course, I have to know whether, the trauma happens. Did the trauma happen? What kind of trauma happened? And my specialty is prenatal to lifespan, but mainly I focus on childhood. So a lot of these traumas, the person themselves directly have not been inflicted upon. Maybe 2 generations before. We call this generational or intergenerational
Yes.
trauma. Unless I ask the right questions, I'm never going to know. I'm never going to find out. But did the psychiatrist ask those questions? Were you traumatized? Where did this anxiety coming from? You're a 23-year-old person.
Yes.
The other things I need to look into is the parenting style. Did the parenting style sort of led this person to this kind of behavior? Is it because the parent in early childhood, in the first 5 years, did not teach this child any kind of coping mechanism? And now this child is a 23-year-old young man and now can't deal with anxiety and thinks that if they just get rid of the stressors in their life, everything is going to be okay. That's an impossibility. How do you ever get rid of your stressors? Besides it, without any stress, how am I going to know my cortisol is up or down,
Yep.
and what is
Yep.
the cortisol doing to my body? So, so therefore, it highlights the importance of physicians, healers talking to each other, and also for us to become a team, not just treating patients in isolation.
That's a great answer. And you just opened up and just the whole can of worms, on a previous show. And actually probably 5 previous shows, because I talk about this all the time. What you hit on, that question that you sent them back to their doctor to say, hey, why am I on these meds? Honestly, as a spine surgeon, and I said that on a recent podcast, I've become very nosy on medications, and some of them, honestly, we're not even familiar because it's just stuff. So what I experience, and I'm sure you see this, a lot. I mean, you're a non-physician, but you're asking them the right questions, because how can you treat their mental health if you don't know what their other factors are? But I see these people and I say, okay, what meds are you on? Oh, doctor, I'm on a lot of meds, right? So then they go to their thing and they pull out these baggies of all these meds. And I've said this before, so I apologize to my audience who hears me saying the same stuff over and over again. And I'm like, what on God's earth are all the, and they don't even, half the time, they have no clue what they're on or why they're on it. And then they just say things, well, at 8 a.m., I take my yellow pill, and then I think I take a blue pill and a green pill at 10. So they're just downing this pharma stuff, right? No clue what they're on. And then I really get into it because then I start looking at like certain things that I'm very passionate about. I look at their diabetes. I'm like, well, what's your diabetes management like? You have type 2 diabetes. Have you tried intermittent fasting? Are you doing this? Are you doing that? And I know the answer. The answer is always no. But I want to try to educate, and I'm very into the whole diabetes too, and obesity, and learned all about the drugs, so I kind of can counsel on that. But that was exactly right. And I always ask them, I say, man, sometimes I just say, you know what? We might need to get you to somebody else to kind of take a re-look at, why are you on 15 meds and you're 39 years old? Not only that, you look terrible. You've got all this stuff going on. You've got something going on with your skin. You've got edema. These are people that are metabolically sick. They're ticking time bombs. And of course, they don't have the right lab workups. No one's looking at their inflammatory markers and the correct liver enzymes and all these other things that like from a longevity wellness standpoint, it's a complete disaster out there. But that without getting into those weeds, I think you're absolutely right. We need to really start understanding root causes, which we're not, instead of trying to do all this polypharmacy and then all this procedural stuff at the end of the road, and look at the period before they get to that point. And some of that obviously has to do with their traumas, because like you said, when they've got this stuff and they don't even know why, they're severely anxious, they've got all this thing. And most of the people that see me, they don't even have the right treatment. They're just anxious. And you could just tell something's going on. Say, hey, what's going on in your life? Everything's good. I'm fine. But yet they're just they're all over the place. And so I think that we do need to have multidisciplinary collaboration. And the more I learn about this, the more I see kind of where I was going wrong before. Because even though I love people, love to talk, I just didn't know what to look for, because we're not taught. I did not know what to look for. I knew what to look for from a spine, standpoint, but I didn't know what to look for signs of PTSD. We don't do that. Doctor, we just don't do that as surgeons, and we need to, because we are the people that that are being contacted. So I think that's awesome. I think that segues beautifully into this concept of how important it is to have community around people. I know you like to talk about this, and that is something that's so important. Now, that's something I paid attention to more before, but now I'm really into it. I really want to know what people's social support is, and if they have support around them. Because I could just tell you something. Sometimes, listen, I sit down, I'm telling people about major surgery, and I could tell the spouse is not supportive at all. They don't have a good relationship. And I already get that feeling. Now I'm getting that intuition, just having seen these people, that we're in for a rough road. Because when that person needs to recover, if you already have a spouse that is not supportive, or clearly there's like a little bit of an abusive dynamic. Listen, if I'm seeing an abusive dynamic in the office, imagine what it is at home. And so I'm starting to pick up on these clues that I never really thought about before. And 99% of surgeons, that's not what we think about. It's not what we do. And so can you talk about the importance and how much better people recover when they have a strong social support and community around them? And maybe give me some advice on how, if I feel like they don't have a supportive environment, what do I do? What do I do as a physician? How do I help? I can't make them have new friends, right? What do we do in that situation?
That's an important question, because when we say community, people usually, the image that we get, the mental image we get, we think community is a neighborhood, that, for example, in Southern California, the city of Irvine is supposed to be the epitome of a community, because everything you need, you will find in the city of Irvine. Irvine is pre-planned community. All the homes look alike. And there's very strict laws and rules about how everybody lives in that community, and everything that you need, from shopping centers, from parks. On every corner there's a park, every corner there's a library, every corner there's a community center, and it is one of the safest. As a matter of fact, last time I heard was number 3 safest city in the United States of America. So when we talk about community, people think that's what we're talking about. That's not what we're talking about. That is called a neighborhood, that has its own laws and rules. And if you don't abide by those rules and laws, you'll be kicked out, right? A community can be a society of people that every one of them cares for the other one. And if one person in that community is hurting in some ways, physically, emotionally, financially, that the rest of the community comes together. There is an indigenous community in I think it is in Australia, which has its own law. We call it the law. I put it in quotation mark, which means because they're indigenous and they are the tribes that have always lived by their own rules, if somebody in that community breaks the law of that community, there are no jails, there are no punishment, there is no way of law enforcement. And the government at large is trying to break it down because they say if somebody steals in your community, they have to abide by the governmental rules and regulations. But they're fighting it tooth and nails because they say when somebody breaks the law in our community, we know they broke the law because they're hurting. So what they do, they put that person in the center of the town. And each one of the members of that community comes and reminds this one individual that you are a good person. We know that you did this for a reason, but you're much higher level than this. You are not what your crime defines you. And they do this day and night until this person realizes that what they did was wrong and it hurt the other community members. Obviously, when I'm defining this, and I talk about this in class, this isn't something as a legend that I'm, just using as an anecdote. But then I put this to question to my class, to my students. How is this going to work in modern day? Because what we think of a community is you break the law, you're going to be punished. But these things have sort of gone array. They have gone the wrong way. They no longer serve us. Now, I'm not here to advocate lawless communities,
Yes.
and that we're going to go with the indigenous v law and start, just talking to people about it. But what I'm talking about community is that everyone cares about the other person so much so that if someone is hurting, they're hurting. That's not what we have today. When we say community of healers, is that when a psychiatrist gets a question from the patients that why am I on these things, doesn't give them the message, go tell her she doesn't need to concern herself, which is me, to concern yourself, understands why these questions are being asked. Because other than this, we're band-aiding any kind of problems. And you're a surgeon, and surgeons of all of the medical fields, you're always working in isolation. So it's really refreshing that you as a surgeon it is a concept to be explored, and it is very important. Our survival depends on it, is all I can say about it.
Yeah, so I think that, the way when people don't have a surrounding community, and whether that's friends, family, or just live in one of these kind of cultural pockets, because in some cultures, like for example, in the state of Minnesota, we have a cult, but we have a Hmong culture here, okay? And they are very, very tight. And I love taking care of them. I have a lot of Hmong patients. And they see the world very, very differently, right? It's a lot of cultural stuff. But literally, they all come to support. They get so much support. When grandma needs her spine surgery, everybody's there. I mean, there's just people in the halls, and I go out to talk to families, and there's 19 people there. I'm like, okay. I'm really concerned with these people that don't have a community around them and are going to undergo these major procedures, because there are numerous studies, and I've talked to other people about it, that show, like, for example, if you're going to have heart surgery, people do so much better when they have social support networks around them than when they don't. It's actually documented. Their wounds heal faster. It's pretty amazing, because it is, like you said before, it's that human contact that we have that keeps us alive. And that's a concept that is just so beautiful. Like, we can't, like, right in the movie, what was the name of that movie with Tom Hanks when he's out there and he had the ball, like he was stranded, and he just basically talked to the volleyball. And when he lost the volleyball, like, he just cried, right? Wilson was the name of the volleyball. I don't remember the name of the movie, but it just shows that when we don't have, we are just social beings, and when we don't have each other, it's such a big problem. And that's why it's so important to think about all these, kind of social, psychosocial, factors around people that are seeking treatment, and just making sure that we are at least aware of that and getting them to people like you if they need to talk, or getting them to their psychiatrist or whoever, is very, very important. And we do all need to work together. Like, I mean, you nailed it, which is it, if we're not working together, then basically what they're doing is they're getting a completely disjointed opinion. Because if I don't know that they like are seeing the gastroenterologist for some horrible thing and their gut microbiome is a disaster, and then I operate on them, they might get sick or they might get C. diff because we missed something, that because we never communicated with that provider who doesn't care about the spine surgery, and so on and so forth. So people might have 10 providers, but if it's all independent of each other, that's not like that community that you kind of talk about there. But you just one quick thing, just going back, what would you say are, if for people that really don't have a social support network, what would you say? Like, I'm a physician, I have somebody in and they just start, like I said, as a spine surgeon, I elicit a lot of tears when I see people, because I'm telling them, sometimes it's not good news, or whatever, or we're just having a conversation. But what about when somebody starts tearing up and say, that they have no family where they live. They just had a horrible, incident with their best friend and their only friend, and now they're basically completely alone, but yet they clearly need something. Like, what do we do with those people?
Well, yes. And for someone who really feels alone and they don't see a way out, it's almost an impossibility to become part of a community.
Mhm.
But these sort of, ideas that we're discussing today are not just your opinion or my opinion. These are all scientifically
Yes.
evidence-based and scientifically backed. A lot of your listeners, I'm sure, are familiar with the idea of blue zones. Blue zones are
Yes. Yes.
yeah, areas in the world, and one of them is right here in California, that has people of the centenarian age, which means these communities house people who have reached 100 years of age and in a healthy way. They're not on life support, or
Yes.
they're living normal and sort of active life. So one of the secrets to longevity and to staying healthy until the day that all of our organs give up, because that's inevitable, but we're not really supposed to age in a sort of a downhill way. That's not what aging is. I teach classes on aging, and there are many scientific and biological facts that say the fact that I think I'm going to lose all my teeth, the fact that I'm going to lose my eyesight, all of these are unfortunately sort of dictated upon us and given us that concept that, okay, there's nothing I can do about it. And then pretty soon I start walking with a cane because I think that's what I'm supposed to be doing. So all of these medically now have been shown that we can age in a healthy way and gracefully. However, one of the most important ingredient in order to do so is to find communities. I used to teach a class on community, meaning how we can bring people about. And in the beginning of the class, I used to tell my students that by the end of the semester, you are going to be amazed and in awe of how many services are available to you, to people at any given age, that not only the local government supports, but also government at large at the federal level supports. But the problem is people don't know about these programs. That's one thing.
Yes.
If somebody feels alone, all they have to do, thank God nowadays for Dr. Google, you can just go on Google
Yes.
and find community-based services around you. We are not isolated. We just have to find these communities that fit our needs. The second thing about this sort of not feeling alone is we have to reach out to people. And another
Yes.
good thing about aging is that we become very selective about who we want to be,
Yes.
socializing with. That's a good thing. So imagine this. We're getting older, but we're getting wiser. We're choosing our social network, as you named it. That's exactly what it is. It's called social network. We are choosing our social network carefully. And we're also aware of services available. And the predictions are that a lot of these needs are going to be met through non-profit organizations. Can you imagine that? So NGOs as we know them as nonprofit
Yeah.
here, 501(c)s, are the organizations that are going to be instrumental in the near future in bringing people together and serving communities and meeting needs of the community. So plans are out there. Ideas are out there. All we have to do is a little bit of research, go online, find your community, and ask for help. You shall not be turned down. I own a nonprofit. I know what the power of nonprofits. And this other thing about nonprofit is that it is predicted that majority of them are going to be run by guess whom. So you have it all. Find your community. You're not alone.
You hit something right on there. I think that women have made such an impact, just globally. You brought up what happened in your home country with women, and obviously the revolution. I'm nowhere near an expert, on what happened there, but I am very deeply invested in women's issues. And I think that in our country, we have our own issues with women. One of the things that I'm obviously mostly partial, like what is women in surgery and the long, sometimes tortuous road and some of the things that they need to go through, which is it can be quite difficult. Now just going off topic a little bit, we can go back to, because I wanted to talk to you about social media and its effect on the feeling of loneliness and things like that. But you coming from Iran, where you went through all that upheaval and then coming here, what was your experience like as you kind of went into the academic circles as a woman? Did you feel like that you had a lot of struggles as a woman, or did you feel like you found the right mentors and the right talk about social network where it was a pretty easy transition for you, especially having seen what the disaster, like what happened in the home country during that thing? Like maybe your mentality were like, oh, this is nothing. This is compared to what women are going through there. This is piece of cake. Or did you find it as difficult as I've seen some women have it in some of these circles? Because in academia, there's still some stuff we got to work on.
Absolutely. I think the answer to that question will actually apply to a lot of your listeners because it all starts with your upbringing. It's not so much so that I was an Iranian young woman, of 18 years of age and came to America and I was subjected to either discrimination or privileges. It wasn't really, didn't start there. It really starts with your upbringing. I was raised in a household that was extremely matriarchal. My mother was in charge. My mother was at the top of the hierarchy. There was generations of generations. I had strong women in my background. I mean, and then my father was he's passed since, but he was extremely liberal in his ideas. It was an absolute delight to be raised by a father that had no problem, sort of giving the power to my mother, and my mother, who enjoyed being in charge of things and making decisions. Now, this doesn't mean that my childhood was free of any kind of trauma. No, actually, I was very traumatized in many, many areas in my childhood, but at least the foundation was healthy. And
Yes.
so for women to be in charge and for women to go for what they want was not such an unachievable or unthinkable thing for me. I was raised thinking I can do whatever I want. And that's why, in the early on our conversation, I mentioned I wanted to be an engineer like my dad. And my mom was my first, sort of promoter. Yeah, absolutely. And I studied mathematics all my life in middle school and in high school because that's the route I had taken. So I came to, first I stopped in France because my mom, although she wanted me to become an engineer, she didn't want me to go as far as America because France is sort of like midway, it's only 5 hours flight to Iran. So she was okay with that. But I couldn't pursue engineering in France because they have such an interesting educational system. So I found it that I need to be in America. But having come to America sort of coincided exactly when the revolution was taking place in Iran. So my timing was sort of off when I came here. So, and yes, it has been few decades of women's, right to vote and women's right to abortion. And then in the 1980s with the Equal Opportunity Employment Federal Act, Yes, women were given extra sort of support to be in technical positions. Yes, to all of that. But the country, the United States of America as a country wasn't ready for a cultural change when you have a woman engineer. So I did face a lot of challenges. I remember in my GE classes in the first 2 years, I took general ed classes. There were 300 students who were studying to become engineers, and I was one of three girls. And then all of the discrimination and harassment, sexually and otherwise, that I was subjected to in the academics, in my classroom, with my professors, as a young woman, was really traumatic. However, because I came from that strong background, I was able to combat and I was able to use it. And then the key word you used was mentor. I have always in my life believed in mentorship. I believe is the epitome of success. And for anyone at any age, we all need mentors. And I have my own sort of saying. I always say, find your tribe, find people that will accept you into the village, in their village. And because as human beings, yes, we want to be part of the community. But remember, it's not just being in the community, it's belonging. To belong is the key word. So every time I find my tribe, and I right now sitting here talking to you, I can count on two hands the number of tribes that I am part of. Tribe of females in academics, tribes of scientists in general, tribe of women that I just, use as learning tools for myself, women that I just have fun, women that we just put together, we come together twice or three times a year and we start new projects. I have a group of friends or tribe that we do philanthropic, nonprofit projects. So we need to belong to communities, but we also need mentors to show us how to belong to these communities and how to stay in the community. And that is what has been my, I would say, privilege, that I recognize that from very early on in life. I cannot survive without community. I cannot survive without a good mentor. And this is something that I always thrive in.
That's a beautiful answer. I think that 2 points that are really interesting about what you said is the first one was how important the way that we are raised. And I know that childhood development is so important to the things, and you teach about it and you talk about it, but having a strong kind of household prepares us mentally to be able to do everything. I was on Dr. Fujan's show, and I was talking about my own upbringing. I was adopted, and I was adopted into an Italian family. I mixed myself. I just gave her the whole story about it. But it's very interesting because my adopted parents were so loving and instilled such tremendous values in me personally. It made me such a strong person. So even though I was other, even though I basically grew up in an all Italian neighborhood, and I had all kinds of stuff. You could watch that show and you could see my stuff. We're not here to talk about me, but it definitely strengthened me to the point where I was able to be comfortable enough in my own skin that I was able to overcome some of these things. So I never really fell into the victimhood mentality that many people do when they're subject to tough times, right? I was always able to get through that. And I'm very grateful that I was in a household that was, that preached just being strong and self-sustaining and having self-awareness, all these different things. And then, the other thing you just talk about, I love it, finding your own tribe. And so one of the things I talked about on that show when I was talking about myself personally, because of the way my background, is, and I never really fit into any particular box, being just so other, right? And so it took me a while as I was developing as a young man to really find my tribe. But once I became comfortable enough in just being myself and not trying to be this person in this group and that person in that group, just find people that really accepted me for who I am, that's when I really flourished and was able to thrive. but also needed the mentorship and people taking me under their wing and believing in me, because otherwise there's no chance. Without people had such, I am so thankful to the people, and not just my parents, but all these mentors that took me under my wing during medical school, during residency, who believed in me, sometimes more than I believed in myself, and were able to get me to the point I am now. And that's why, I know you're a mentor to many people. I love mentoring young people because giving back, and just maybe sometimes people just need people to believe in it means so much. People don't realize, like, if you don't have anyone that believes in you, you don't, it hurts. That is a trauma itself. If no one believes in you, there's 1% of people are so strong that they just believe in themselves. Everybody else thinks they're going to be a failure and they do great. It doesn't work that way. And that's why it's so important to pick each other up and help your struggling colleague, help your a student that's coming up that really wants to be a spine surgeon one day, just help in general. And I just appreciate that. Sorry, you're stimulating so many different, ideas, but I think that was, no, it's such a beautiful way that you put it. So on that note, I want to get back to what I was talking about before. Sorry to go into a big, long, discussion about my own self, but I feel like, when I talk to you guys that are, so astute in the, in the psychology fields, I feel like I should just tell you my whole life story while I'm here. I might as well get that, the extra session in front of the whole world. So one of my concerns, I have a couple things that I want to ask you about. Social media. Social media is a really big one, and it's somewhat controversial. Now, I am right in the, over the last year, I've really gone kind of, I don't want to say haywire, but I've really decided that social media is a platform that I need to be on as a physician to try to talk the message of health and wellness, also spine surgery, but really I want to focus on just the totality and integrative health and things like that. However, I'm very concerned with social media in general for our youth, and the fact that there is such an increase in mental health, especially after the pandemic, mental health issues, and these kids are on social media all day, every day. What is your opinion, being around, all these children and looking at their kind of their mental health, and also being in education, because they have to go through the system, and that's part of that. You talk about their community, their schools are their community. What do you think about social media, and where are we going? I feel, do we need more legislation, or things okay right now? Do parents just need to be the ones that are the gatekeepers? Because I just feel like it's a big thing. And you talk about like just being healthy. Us as adults, if our kids are not healthy mentally, how are we going to be healthy mentally? So it's something that we have to really talk about.
That's such a hot topic with me. For over 15 years, I taught a class on social media and impact on children and adolescents. And this class is, this is a semester class. Therefore, we had about 15 weeks each week. Can you imagine that? Each week, we will discuss one outlet of social media. One week was lyrics. One week would be music itself, heavy metal versus rock and all of that. One week would be advertisement. I mean, every single chapter in this book that I taught to my students, and it was a very popular class too, because it was not only, a credit, college credit, but also you were learning life lessons. And I love teaching classes that also teach life lessons to students. So this about 15 areas of social media and mass media, actually, we call it 15 outlets or 15 ways of mass media that is really impacting everything about our lives, from our culture, from the way we think, from our judgment, from our morality, from our physical development. I mean, we're talking about big stuff here. And one of my, I guess I can also call this a privilege, is when I got into the academia, I accidentally fell into sort of multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary, and cross-cultural, multicultural disciplines, which means all the classes I teach for the past 24 years, they have all been interdisciplinary, which means we talk about biology, we talk about sociology, we talk about anthropology, and of course, psychology. So it's given me the opportunity to look into every aspect of human development when it comes to any kind of factorial elements, such as mass media. This wasn't something new. This isn't something that, you ask me this question today, this question was asked in 1970s when television became a household item. Can you imagine? So 4 decades ago or so, we knew this was going to be trouble. And a social theorist called Gerbner, he came up with the idea, with the theory of cultivist, or mass media shaping our culture. He warned us against it. He warned us against the impact of these messages we received through social media. Did we pay attention? And you talk about legislation. Did we pay attention? Well, yes and no. Yeah, we started sort of rating movies, and there was the parent council that started lobbying, for better rights and better sort of censorship of these, accessibility of children to these, and adolescents to it. But we didn't do enough. We absolutely did not do enough. Now, if you'd asked me this question in 1980s and even 1990s, I would have said mass media got to go. I mean, oh, there's internet stuff, we got to stop it. Today, and you and I were scientists, so we know when science makes mistakes, it corrects itself. So today we say, well, what if this is the way of the future? What if it's time for us to look into the way we socialize, with the way we receive news, the way we look at news? Maybe it is time to change our perspective. So today I will answer this question by saying there is still a lot of work to be done on the true impact of mass media on how children, adolescents, and even adults are being raised. I have grandparents who are so preoccupied with their iPad that they don't have time to play with their grandchild. I mean, this I call a tragedy. When I have clients whose husbands come home and is sitting on the couch and so preoccupied with their cell phone that I had a session this morning with one of these clients that she says, my 4-year-old son is trying to show daddy something, and dad keeps saying, yeah, just a minute. And then when I say to my son, come here, what is it trying to say? My husband gets mad at me because now you're trying to make me look bad in front of my son. So when we look at it this way, then I would answer this question. Mass media, it is doing a lot of harm at any age group. This is no longer about a college course that is talking about the impact of mass media on child and adolescent. I will change that title now. The impact of mass media, which includes advertisement, it includes all kinds of social media, includes any print. I would answer that question. Unfortunately, not only did we not fix the impact of mass media on child and adolescent when we had the time in the 1990s and in the millennium, we have now spread that harm to the older age, and on top of that, to parents. Remember, we talked about just a while ago, we talked about somebody believing in you. The first person who is supposed to believe in us, guess who that is? Is
Your
our parents.
parents, of course.
If they don't give us the seal of approval, we're doomed. Who else is going to give that to me? So I become an adult whose life is spent on trying to get approval from others and trying to make up for what I didn't get when I was 5 years old. That's not going to work. So I have to bring my client on a trip to childhood, to the inner child, and I have to work with them, and I have to have them, the adult version of themselves, convincing the inner child version of themselves that you're enough. I believe in you. You're okay. Until we go through that healing process, this adult will spend their entire life trying to socialize with the wrong people. Remember, we talked about socialization, selective socialization. And I get myself in trouble in committing myself in troubled relationships, not knowing how to get out of it. And when I get out of a troubled relationship, I'm broken. Rather than celebrating, I'm thinking, okay, I have a client who's 40 years old, and she prefers being in an extremely toxic, I cannot go into details. She prefers being in this extremely toxic relationship because she tells me, but I have no one else. And I said, well, why don't we just work on you finding a healthy person to be in a relationship? But I don't have the energy. So this is why we say you believe in yourself, but that's going to take time. And mass media, I'm not saying any longer that has to go. What I'm saying now is we have to teach, and this is what it is called media literacy, or also called media education. So what we proposed many years ago was to educate parents, pediatricians, and teachers, and any child caregiver, any child or any person who works with children. We propose that these four groups learn how to do media literacy, which is basically the same thing we do with children, teaching them how to read and write. We teach them how to use mass media in a healthy way. I teach the workshop on it. There are many workshops on it. But until, we're talking, going back to the integrative medicine,
Yes.
this is what we're talking about. Parents, pediatricians, any child caregiver, and teachers need to learn media literacy, because we cannot throw the baby out with the bathwater. We know mass media has done a lot of good. So today, the answer to that is we need to educate ourselves.
I mean, just a great answer. You know, my kids go to a really good school, and I'm actually going to bring that up with the principal that we should have a media literacy class. I might have her reach out to you because I think it's real important. Now, in our household, the way we managed it is, my wife has been great with the kids from the beginning, kind of keeping them off of social media early. Now they're older, they're 15 and one's about to be 17, and they slowly introduce to social media, but they're not on it too much. They're on it enough, enough to annoy the parents, right? Because we just stare at them looking at their phones, but way, way less. They're not concerned about how many people are liking their, whatever they're, because hopefully we're doing a good job of paying attention to them. But it's interesting what you say. I wonder if, I think that it's not even social media, it's just media in general. Because if we're not looking at social, we're looking at YouTube, everyone's on their phone, all those pictures of every family member looking at their phone. But the truth is, there's a couple times I've caught myself where I'm like either texting with a colleague, or I'm on social media, or I'm doing whatever. So anyway, they're oblivious to, like the parents can be oblivious to what's going on. And then when I look up and take a breath from my phone or whatever I'm doing, and I can see the disappointment, in their face. Now, I can imagine a household where everybody's always distracted because of mass media and no one's paying attention to the kids. And so then they end up needing like this attention paid from their likes and from their family. I mean, there's Black Mirror episodes about this, right? Like where all the likes are on their head. It's just like exactly what you were saying, where if we're not paying attention, providing that comfort for them, that somebody's listening, that we're there for them, that we're their community, because we're so distracted, that becomes then almost like a generational injury. Because now my parents didn't pay attention to me. So now I need the love and attention in dysfunctional relationships like you were talking about before. And it's just interesting. It's just fascinating. And we all need to get better. And I think we all need, training on mass media, because it's everything. And it does become at times a very toxic environment because it's just too much. We all find ourselves at times too much with the phone, the computer. We just need to disconnect, go out in nature, be with our families with nothing, and just like throw away the phone, take the battery out, just be done. So I think that taking these holidays, electronic holidays, I'm sure is that part of your teaching, taking electronic breaks, and how long should it be?
Okay, so if you had asked me this question again, I'm going to say it, 1990s or in the millennium, I would have said more than half an hour would be harmful, of any kind of screen time. We'll call it a screen time, whether it's a cell phone, a computer. But today, unfortunately, here's the sort of a alarming statistics that in the United States, children spend between 4 to 6 hours of their awake time on screen. This again, if it asked me this question, I said more than half an hour is completely harmful. But now they're doing everything on their computer. They're doing homework on their computer. They're doing research on their computer. They're communicating with their teachers. Parents are communicating with their teachers. So again, we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And by the way, this has become a global pandemic. So last time I checked into it because I was doing a research paper, this number has alarmingly gone up to 4 hours globally. So this isn't anymore the American parents' nightmare. This is the world parents' nightmare. of not having any human contact in between. Just imagine your child comes home at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. They're on that computer doing homework, doing all that. And then 4 hours later, when it's time for family dinner, mom is on that cell phone, dad is on the cell phone. We're not trying to take away technology from people. What we're doing is we don't teach the right way to use technology. So if you're asking for some numbers, I would say for children younger than 2 years, we do not recommend any kind of a screen time. And we can have a whole show about why any kind of screen time would be harmful. In a very sort of a accelerated way, I can explain this, that because all of the brain cells are forming, the neurons are connecting, axons are developing, the brain itself of a child younger than 2 years old is just producing brain cells. And you introduce technology and computer and screen time to it, you are mapping it in a less than ideal way. And mapping it means connection between all these neurons. And that's another, I'm going to give a sidebar here. One of my other pet peeves is that our psychologists do not study enough about neurology of the brain. And I always tell my students,
Yes.
how are you going to address anxiety, bipolar, depression in a client when you don't even know how the brain works and what leads to anxiety and depression? And everybody thinks, okay, lack of serotonin. Yes, we all know that. But how does lack of serotonin leads to depression? So my pet peeve is that universities, especially psychology universities, must offer a couple of classes on neurology. And we do offer pharmacological classes, but that's not enough even. So I'd say educate ourselves on the structure of the brain. So as a parent of a 2-year-old, I'm going to go back to our subject again. As a parent of a 2-year-old, if I, as a parent, am educated enough to know how my 2-year-old's brain is being structured, then I myself would be scared into not allowing my 2-year-old to have an iPad and stare at it for 4 or 5 hours, because as a parent, I don't know what to do with this child. I would understand it. And one thing we do with parents, and I myself in my practice is extremely vital for me to do this, is we call psych education, which means I educate every one of my clients, whatever a challenge or problem they come to me with. I always put aside time to educate them about their own brain, how it works, and how whatever the problem is they're dealing with is impacting their brain, because it's important. Education is important. So for younger than 2 years, no screen time. For preschoolers, screen time should be supervised. We should not use television or screens as babysitting. You should never allow your child of a 3-year-old, 4-year-old to even watch cartoon without you. Yes, exactly.
I've not
So
heard that before. Unfortunately,
why
I can't
am I
go back.
saying that?
My kids are
Why am I
teenagers.
saying
You should have told me this a long time ago. No,
why am
no,
I saying that?
no wonder. Now it makes sense. Okay.
Why am I saying that? I grew up with Tom and Jerry. You know how destructive Tom and Jerry cartoon is and was? I mean,
I
I'm not
know, I
going to go
remember. I
into it.
enjoy, it's funny. I enjoy Tom and Jerry now. It is so violent.
Funny. Yes, it is
Jesus.
so funny. But I never appreciated Tom and Jerry or Tom smoking a cigarette after kissing a female cat. Okay, there I said it. Okay, we call this cognitive priming, unfortunately. That's why it's so important for parents to understand what their child's development is about. Cognitive priming is sort of suggestive ideas. My child is watching these things in Tom and Jerry cartoon. And unfortunately, another thing that we teach in class is just because it's animation doesn't mean it's innocent. Okay. So I have to sit with my child when my child is watching Tom and Jerry, when my child is watching Roadrunner. How many times Roadrunner used, a series of dynamites to blow up something? My child of 3 years old doesn't understand the concept behind it. My child of 3 years old, who is now getting into brain mapping, but it is very limited, very limited because, 3-year-old, 4-year-old, 5-year-olds by nature, and according to many, many of the theories, including Piaget's theory, are very self-centered, which means everything they see, they believe. So if I'm not there watching cartoon with my 3-year-old, then my 3-year-old is going to make up their own scenarios, as we call them a schema. They're going to create their own scripts. And guess what? When in preschool, I have a client right now. So my 4-year-old is hitting other kids. I wonder where that comes from. So we have to supervise, but actually that's what we call it, supervised media use. That parents have to be there when their child is using any kind of media. And then in school time, then that's different. We have to supervise that they're using media for what it is intended to be used. So I'm not taking the fun out of it. Please, nobody think that I'm taking away anybody's screen time, but we have to have a purpose, because I'm alarmed when I have a client that tells me my 80-year-old mother is addicted to her iPad. And I'm thinking, maybe we should do a show on that. What is the role of grandparents? I actually gave a talk at a conference, and I know that the grandparents sitting there finally understood what their role is in this day and night age of modern living. So a grandmother who has lost her role, who's lost her passion, who's lost her purpose, which, by the way, what is that? We call grandparents cultural ambassadors, which means they're there to share narratives, family stories. But when my client says my 80-year-old mother is addicted to her iPad, then that's it. I'm done. I'm dropping the mic, because where are we going to go with this?
I don't know. We got to get grandma off of it's funny you bring that up. I want to ask you more about like preteens and teens, because I think that's very, very important, because that's really where they get into a lot of a lot of trouble with depression. And then you get all these filters, you change your ears and you're not comfortable with yourself. It's just whatever. I'm not a social media expert, but I had a lot of free time on my hands during COVID. So I did a lot of deep dive into social media, because we all found ourselves, a lot more into social media. But one of the comments that I want to say is that over the course of my career, I've noticed that a lot older people, like literally, like they come in with their spouse who's talking about having a spinal surgery, and the spouse is on the computer the whole time, and they're like 70. And they're literally like on not on the computer, on their phone, scrolling. They're looking at TikTok. I'm like, you're watching TikTok? Your wife is going to have a big scoliosis surgery, going to be in the hospital for days, and you're scrolling through cat videos on TikTok. And they're like older people, and every time I see that, I'm like, oh boy, I don't want to be a naysayer either. I don't want to sound like whatever. I don't want to sound like our parents that it's just like, the world's it's all going to hell. But it is very concerning to see our overall addiction with constantly having to stimulate our dopamine centers. Very interesting. Dr. Blum, when I had him on the show, and first of all, I had to do all this research. He has a 1,000-page resume. It's crazy how much work he's done. But I became like obsessed with the reward deficiency syndrome. And it's so funny. So I don't even remember if he was even on the show or if we were talking offline, but we were just talking about like all these addictions are all part of it. And the problem is because so many of us have the addiction alleles, right? It's the same thing. Like we cannot stop. We have to keep stimulating that dopamine release in the pleasure reward center. That's why we keep staring at our phones. We don't even know what to do, without them. So just random observations about how, insane the addiction is with everything. And they all know this, right? We're all commoditized by all these companies to keep going back for that dopamine release. But anyway, that's an aside. I just wanted to just say how much I just observed how many older adults are obsessed. They just won't stop. They don't know what to do. They can't even find pleasure in normal stuff if it's not electronic. But going back to the teens and the preteens, like how do we how do you think, even give you a harder question, because how do you think that all this social media stuff is going to impact these generations that are growing up in the age of social media, of constant electronics. They do everything, like you said, at school. How are they going to compare, like, for example, to the millennials in their work ethic, in their ability to find pleasure outside of the electronic world? Now we're going to do all these virtual worlds too, like, find pleasure in the simple things, like just having this conversation we're having right now. I'm having a great time having this conversation. Those kids, do they even want to have conversations anymore in the future?
So when it comes to the that age group, teen and preteens and social media, we have a really big problem. Yeah, I mean that age group, I would say, has really gotten the worst of it as far as just getting lost in the world, not only of video games but also addictive behavior. So I'm going to use an example, a real life example, for to really explore this question. I give workshops parallel for parents and for teenagers. Recently gave a workshop on exactly that, but I didn't call it social media because, these kids have heard enough about parents telling them it's bad for you, get off of it. And unfortunately, parents feel powerless and almost like desperate. So the only way they know how to is to take it away from them. All right, so you take it away from them and then you give it back to them. What is the lesson learned here? Nothing. Kids get used to it. And by the way, sort of sidebar here, one of the things, or I don't want to call it a crime, but one of the lack of knowledge that us as parents do is when children have this natural, innate desire and ability to learn without being rewarded, we somehow kill that in them, and they become reward oriented. And that's why,
Yes.
Dr. Blum, one of my heroes, talks about the dopamine and how no longer is produced, and or it is produced so much that we get into this addictive behavior and we want more and more and more of it. One of the theorists that I really believe in, Alfie Kohn, and he's an advocate, actually, whole sort of reward and punishment, and he's an advocate for us to abolish it. He believes that young children from birth are eager to learn, or that we're
Yes.
born with this intrinsic motivation. Nobody has to tell us to try to crawl. Nobody has to really push us to walk. A 2-year-old who's trying to, climb up a chair and falls 50 times is never going to say, you know what, man, that's it. I'm not going to learn how to climb this chair. I'm going to give it up. What does a 2-year-old do? Tries for the 51st time until they master it. So, what happens to that mastery? What happens to that intrinsic motivation? Parents happens. What we do, we start saying, you do this, I'm going to reward you. And eventually, no, I'm not trying to make this a fault of parents, or make it a sin of some sort. I'm just saying lack of education. And we talked about psychoeducation, which means we have to teach our parents to look at the child's brain and how it is formed and how it is mapped. And we don't need them to be a neurologist, but we know them to know enough about it so that it makes sense to them. To know that my 2-year-old has this innate desire to learn, I'm going to support it rather than trying to make it easy on everybody. Hey, if you don't do this, I'm going to give you this. And eventually the child learns, you know what? I'm going to go with extrinsic motivation. I encourage your listeners to watch on YouTube. It's called Marshmallow Test. If you want to see something, have you seen it yourself? Have
I
you ever
have
seen
not. I'm going to
it?
look at it.
It's a developmental psych testing, and it is phenomenal. First of all, it's funny because, I'm not going to give it away for those who have not seen it. So watch it. You'll see. It will show you about intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. Now, I'm not trying to forget individual differences and genetic dispositions, and not by any means am I dismissing things that will go in a certain way no matter what parents do. And addiction may be one of them. I can clearly see that. But what we're saying is, let's work best with what we have. So going back to the workshop I was talking about, I had this workshop. I didn't call it social media. I call it setting long-term and short-term goals for adolescents. I had 110 adolescents show up to this workshop. And I was myself, to be honest with you, amazed of the level of maturity and wisdom these kids had, but unfortunately didn't have any outlet to share it with, because we talked about social media in that workshop. I talked to them about the harms of social media. I used real life examples, such as all of those video games that you so happily go online and through the dark web and you try to find it without parents knowing. Guess who developed and manufactured those? And guess where they're coming from? Have you ever looked into see which country is manufacturing those and whether or not they have your best benefit in heart? And guess what? And I'm not going to name any countries because this is a radio, a podcast show, but there are certain countries in the world that have become so entangled with this video game business and addiction that this country alone started the first treatment centers for video game addictions and the harms that led to antisocial behavior. Might I remind our audience of what just happened in America, which was the young man who was responsible for killing those students at an elementary school. His parents now were just sentenced to 10 to 15 years for the first time in the history of our society. Yes. Parents were held responsible. I remember when that young man, student in Virginia Tech, who was from Asian country, I'm not going to name it, but when he committed he went with a assault rifle and killed, I believe, 15, 16 students because his girlfriend broke up with him. In the United States, when you look at all the social media, everybody blamed the school, everybody blamed the professors. And as a professor myself, I thought, okay, I can see some merit to this, but to say that the professor knew this student had mental health disorders and never said anything, I mean, we went haywire with trying to blame the institution, psychologists, the psychiatrist, and the professors. Nobody talked about his childhood and all of that. And at the same time, because it's my business to talk about these social subjects in class. At the same time, they showed his country's newspapers where his parents were so much blamed. And I brought this issue to class. I said, look at the two worlds we live in. They were so shamed and guilted into raising a son who would do such an act that I remember the newspaper reported that they had to move because they could not withstand the guilt. Guess what? A decade or so later, now we have a set of parents who have been found responsible for missing the signs and for his father for buying him an assault rifle for his birthday, knowing that his kid was addicted to violent video games with some mental disorders. I'm not saying anybody who plays video games, please, I would hope that your audience will not assume I'm making generalization. But let's come back to social media. It's harmful when it's unsupervised. It's harmful when it's uneducated. And I don't have a formula to give to everybody that they can use. But the only formula I can give is media literacy, psych education, and knowing about your child's developmental stage. I've written many books about development and what parents need to know at any given age, from birth to 1 year, from preschool to teenagers, even to adulthood. You need to go read about exactly what your child needs so that you don't let them watch cartoons by themselves, and you know why.
I mean, that's a great answer. I think that's really going to help the audience. It certainly helps me because this is not something that certainly I'm an expert at by any stretch of the imagination, but I am spending a lot more time on social media now. So I kind of see what goes on there. I'm using it as an educational platform, as a platform to get out a certain message, because that's where the people are. And I actually just had, Dr. Betsy Grunch, who's basically a social media star, as a neurosurgeon. And we just talked about the importance of us as experts being out there trying to cut through all this crazy noise. I think that part of social media, of electronics, of all those things, I think is great. But I think that then you get into all these other addiction issues where people are just constantly on it for everything. And like you said, not living almost real lives. And, going back to the video game things, we let our children, we always let our children play video games, supervise, to some degree. And there were cutoff times. We always did that kind of stuff. But, in a certain, in one country, they play video games so much, it's not uncommon for them to get DVTs and die while they're playing the video games. I'm sure it's the same country you're talking about, and their issues where they are doing, like, where people, young men and women, they don't even have like boyfriends, girlfriends, or whatever they prefer. They have virtual online, whatever partners of, whatever thing. And it is it's something that we need people like you to be out there, speaking of social media, out there talking about this stuff, educating. And I think it is such a big, this is an entire other, show. And certainly, some people might be asking, why is this surgeon so interested in these topics? Because all of this affects our mental health so much. This is a different world. It's changed so much. And even as physicians, we just need to be aware of, like, what are we dealing with personally? What's making us more anxious? What is, there's so much burnout in physician. Part of some physician burnout is in their free time, instead of going on nature walks and meditating and doing these things, physicians, they're eating badly, they're exposing themselves to all these toxins, and then they're constantly on their phones, always answering texts and pages and on social and doing all these things. So we just need to continue educating ourselves and with experts like you on these very, very important topics. As our time is getting short here, I think, I did want to get into some other things, but I think it's going to take too long. I think I definitely need to have you back on the show, because one of the things that I see a lot of, and I'm definitely not educated enough on, is a lot of gender identity issues. And I will tell you that 18 years ago, when I started in practice, I saw very little of the, of the non-traditional kind of gender identity issues. And now I have a large patient population. And because, listen, I love people, so I don't care what people do, but sometimes I don't understand those psychosocial issues that they bring to the table, and that affects their care as well. And I feel like I need to have better education on gender issues, because there is so much out there. It's so big on social, and there's a lot of confusion. And just saying, oh, like being people wanting to be traditionalists, like you said, you change your mind on certain stuff. Being a traditionalist on that stuff makes no sense if you're taking care of them. How does that make sense in ignoring it? It doesn't make sense. So could you just briefly, where do you think we're going with all this gender identity stuff? And how does, like, the average, like, clinician even deal with this if we don't know about it, but yet it does affect their care in a way?
Yeah, so what you see on the surface, and usually look at gender, what we look at in the depth of a gender, which is a process. It's not a decision. So people think that, I decide to become a woman today. I'm a man. This is not a decision. This is a process. And the process, once it becomes a process, it becomes dependent upon a lot of determinants. So it's not something like buying a Barbie for your little boy is not going to make him, want to change gender or become gay or homosexual. It doesn't happen that way. We have many theories, ironically, from early century that have referenced about gender identity. But of course, today we should know more about it. But isn't it interesting that it seems to be that we're in most dark that we have ever been? Over 100 years ago, Freud talked about it, Piaget talked about it, Kohlberg talked about it. And instead of us expanding on those theoretical concepts, combined with more research, what we've done, we've gone backward. And now it's become the matter of law. It's become a matter of discrimination. I mean, we on this topic, and I'm so passionate about this certain topic that I think we need to really dedicate a whole talk to it. But in general, what I can say is that we're talking about several different things. We're talking about the biological sex. We're talking about gender identity before sexual identity, before sexual orientation, and before eventually, by the time you are a teenager, deciding where you fit on that. So basically, in generality, I can say gender, just like anything else, is a spectrum. I don't identify as a female, and I know we talk about these things in class, and we do exercises in class, and my students talk about their own, what is your gender? Well, I mean, we don't even go with gender. We say, what is your identity? And they define their identity, and they always pressure me into answering my own questions, and I always answer this way: I identify as a human being. And they want to know
Great
what that
answer.
means. Yeah, what does that mean? And I say to them, you look at me, you see a woman. But if you think I have an iota of feelings of what that exactly is, I don't. Because I see myself as a human being with a female reproductive system. Now, if that's going to change anything about me as a human being, then I'm sorry, this is not my discussion. So eventually we got to teach our children to identify as a human being. Then they can go with whatever their genetic predisposition and their environmental determinant, such as hormonal balance, this and that. Then we talk about the subject of how do you identify now as a woman, as a man. But to me, the first question is identifying. How do you identify as a human being? What do you think that is? Because it shouldn't
Yeah,
matter. But as far as how children develop gender identity, it's a process. It's a process. Some theories say, and this is the first thing, as a matter of fact, right now I have a couple of sort of non-traditional gender identity clients
Mhm.
of different ages that I'm working with. So the way we look at it, you asked me how we look at it. The first thing we look at is, when did it start? And theoretically, Piaget tells us that by the age of 2, and it's amazing, by the age of 2, I have enough information, and he believes that we have gender schema, which is what I see on TV, how I see my dad, how I see my mother, that I have a very basic idea about what a girl is, what a boy is. So if you ask a 2-year-old, they will tell you they're either a girl or a boy. But as we know, a 2-year-old brain has not been mapped yet. So it's very rudimentary, it's very basic. By the time they are 3 or 4 years old, according to Freud's theory, they now know whether they identify with dad and whether they identify with mom, thus the concept of Electra or Oedipus. We can get into that later. But according to Kohlberg, none of this is determined until you are 7 years of age, when you know that your gender is consistent, which means what society tells you is what you think you are. And in elementary school, by the way, you put all that thought in the back burner. Most 9-year-old, 10-year-olds do not occupy themselves with thought of gender. It's ironic that between 2 and 7, we are preoccupied with gender and what it means and where do I fit. But in elementary school, our focus, according to Erickson's theory, is mostly on socialization, finding friends. Until I'm a teenager, I come back to this idea and I re-examine. That's why you see a lot of teenagers coming out of the closet around 10th grade.
Yes.
So let's not rush to any judgment. Let's leave it be. Let's Mother Nature take its course. And let's provide the most optimal environment for our children to thrive in, first as a human being, then help them decide what gender they fit in and they feel comfortable. The rest is just smoke and, smoke in the mirror. Nothing important other than that.
No, I love what you said. I just a couple comments. One, it's interesting because one of the discussions I had on the Dr. Fujian show was about, because of my upbringing around so many cultures, just different people from all over the place in the Bronx, and kind of having, just broken bread with almost everybody. I just see, like racism, sexism, that kind of stuff. It never even made sense to me, because I just see the soul in front of me, and I'm just like a very soulful, spiritual person. And it's like we're talking right now, like my spirit is talking to your spirit. This manifestation is just, we don't even know, right? When you wake up, you open your eyes, nobody knows what this is. If you do, let me know, because clearly then you know everything. But anyway, so that's one thing. So I love that we have to identify what I'd like to say to my colleagues and to everybody else. One of the things that is unfortunate, and this happens all over the world, depending on the culture, is that we politicize issues like this. Okay. And that's whatever it is, that's a different societal thing. But as healers, as physicians, it doesn't even matter if I was the staunchest traditionalist ever, right? To all the way to the other end of the spectrum. It doesn't matter. If I have a human being in front of me and they have some cross-gender issue or all this other stuff, I don't understand half of it because honestly, it changes every day. I don't, I'm trying to learn because I take care of these people and they're beautiful people like everybody else. But if even if we have specific values of our own and just say, well, family units like this and this is how it is, that's great if you want to do that at home. But I feel like as providers, we absolutely have the responsibility to understand these cross, we'll call it not just, this is just different. This is like, I'm very interested in the cross-cultural thing, which we didn't even get into on today's show, but also this gender stuff, because I see so much of it now. And because I'm very casual in my style, people want to tell me all about it. They're like, oh, this and that. And they're very free to share with me. So I want to make sure that I am taking that into consideration and they're just kind of the thing. And I want to understand how it impacts their care and things like that. So I think we all just need to treat each other as humans, be very, very sensitive, no matter what our personal things are. And I just believe in medicine and as healers, there's really not much role for politics in what we do when we're trying to take care of people. People are coming to us for help. Just help the person, for who, and what they are. And so I got one final question for you before how can we find it?
Well, developmentally, we're talking about two different things, right? We're talking about, there is a set of emotions, and one of those set of emotions that is very apparent at birth, we manifest it immediately after birth, and we start showing it. So it is a built-in mechanism, the amygdala in the brain and how it is, stimulated on all of that. So there is happy and there is happiness. Happy is a feeling, you could with a great cup of coffee, you could feel happy, or you could feel happy temporarily because something worked out for you, or success was achieved. But happiness is a state of mind, is a perspective of life, is the way you see things, is the way you see challenges. Happiness is not momentarily, is not temporary, is the way you have trained your mind to be. It is peace of mind. Happiness is when you know that there is meaning in things. Happiness is feeling good about yourself. And that doesn't mean that you think you're all that. Feeling good about yourself is very dimension of spirituality, dimension of significance, how you matter to others, dimension of empowerment. So you have all of that. You have achieved happiness. Now, Yale University and Harvard University are offering these courses on happiness, and they're one of the most popular, most registered for courses, which is an indication of everybody is looking for happiness. So in my profession, one of the goals I have with my clients is to help them, to teach them, to guide them, and to counsel them to find their happiness. And once you reach that, it doesn't matter what goes on around you. You could have the most devastating news, God forbid, in your life, or you could have the most exhilarating news in your life. Your outlook is that this is part of me. It's not going to make me, it's not going to break me. And that's happiness. It's teachable, it's learnable, but you do need a healthy state of mind in order to achieve it. So if individuals from, anxiety or depression, first they have to get to a level, a platform of mental well-being, and then they can seek happiness. And the good news is everybody can achieve it.
That's great. And again, I think that as a physician, I got to put my physician hat on. Obviously, I want to be happy. I want my family to be happy. I want you to be happy. I want everybody to be happy. But as a clinician, sometimes that question, the reason I love it is because sometimes I have really depressed, anxious, just people that are just clearly like they are the definition of unhappy. And I know that I'm touching them for these few, for this little bit of time. And if I can put them on a direction to try to give them some meaning in life, or just try to figure out, well, you know what? You're a mess. Why don't you think, like, let's think about what are the things that are important to you? Do you want to be there for your grandkids? Like, what is it? Do you want to write that paper that you never wrote? Do you want to write that book? Do you want to experience Mount Kilimanjaro? I don't know what is going to give them some sense of contentment within their own personal values and goals and dreams and all that stuff. But I take happiness very, very seriously, because ultimately, the reason that you go to the doctor, you don't feel well, or you go to somebody that, is a psychologist or you don't, something is wrong and it's interfering in your happiness, right? It's a happiness thing. It's all about happiness. That's ultimately the goal. And, one of my favorite like motivational speakers of the past, okay, is Les Brown. And he goes on this big tirade about, if you can't do this, you can't do this, and whatever, whatever. And then he ends it with, and if you can't be happy, then what else is there? There's no point. Everything that we're doing as healers is trying to get people in a state where whatever their condition is not blocking their happiness. And so I think, like the science of happiness, I really need to look into those courses. I've heard about them and I know how popular they are. And I think it'll just help us. So I think other providers should go out there and look at happiness courses, or maybe just have you, just get you on the phone and you can tell them, you can give them that spiel, or at least they could watch
Well, just to
the.
give something to your audience, so 4 areas that you can start looking into even right now to see whether you're happy or not. The first area is significance. Do you matter? What matters in this life for you? Where is your position? And then that speaks to spirituality, to what I think I'm here put on the face of the earth for. And everybody can find the answer to that. It could be that I'm here to take care of my grandchild. I'm here to take care of my husband or wife. I'm here to take care of my siblings. I'm here to, do service to community. There is something for everybody. So find your significance. The next one is competence. We have to feel that we are capable of doing things. Sometimes competence can be earned by taking a couple of classes and skill building classes, for example. I want to learn this. So competence, we have to feel that we can do things. The next area is power, that I believe that I have the power to
Mm.
change my path. Everybody has power. We're not victims, unless victim mentality is what you prefer. And believe me, there are people who are so used to that victim mentality that they actually feel powerless. But in order for you to get to that powerful position, and in powerful position doesn't mean you have money or you can change the world's situation. Power means, if this is not sitting well with me, I have the power to change my path. If this path that I go, every time I fall into some kind of pothole, I'm just going to choose another road that is more smooth. And the last one is virtue. Virtues are very important, no matter what religion you come from. Virtues are all the same. Virtues in this position of happiness means that I am a good person. I make mistakes, but in general, I'm a good person. So you have those 4 areas. You start thinking about them: significance, competence, power. And I see good in people. And that's the start of happiness. And then taking those courses at Harvard or Yale will also be helpful, or taking a workshop with me. Either of those areas will take you to happiness. Easy.
No, I think that's great. Just real quick, number 3, okay, on your list of things is so important for us as, physicians to really restore. And this is really what I'm doing with my social media campaign, with this podcast, with everything. I want to empower people to become, and I'm going to quote Margaret Wallace, who is one of the people that are on an upcoming podcast, is to become the CEOs of their own health. And by doing that, they re-empower themselves, because what I see time and time again, like I mentioned before, all these people that have completely given up, they feel completely powerless. They're spinning around. They've got chronic disease and they've just given up. They feel like they can't do anything about it and they stop even trying. next thing you know, they're in the ICU because they just let their disease go out of control. I see that all the time. I just had one of my colleagues was just saying his dad is like 300 and something pounds, is diabetic, and absolutely is done. He won't stop smoking. He won't stop eating food. And he told him, you know what, you're going to eat yourself to death with all the sugars and everything because he's diabetic. And you know what his response is? Don't take away my only happiness in life. I love food. Given up. Done. And we see so much of that. So empowering people by educating them, and honestly, the earlier we can get them in prevention, wellness, integrative health, the more they're going to feel empowered. So they never even get to the stages where they're so desperate and they don't have anything else to do. And then it all kind of falls apart. So thank you for those four. Honestly, I got to say that you have given us a master class in psychology. I feel like you just did like an entire, like this is like an entire, full lecture, right, for you with your students. This is great. So people just need to watch this, and it's like they're coming to your class, and I really look forward to having you on again, because I think there's a bunch of notes and things that I took during this where I just want to pick your brain more. You're just such a tremendous resource on this stuff. Can you let our listeners and watchers know where they can, what are the best places to find you? And we'll pass this information along to them as well, because I think after listening to this, a lot of parents, a lot of people that are looking for meaning, they're going to just be looking for Dr. Jafari for some help.
Well, of course, finding me is very easy, I promise you, because I've been in the academic arena. You put my name down, you're gonna find me. You're gonna find my email. But one email I can give to your audience that they can contact me that way directly is Dr. with Dr. period njafari.edd@gmail.com. Again, finding me is not a hard thing. Not that I'm famous, but only because I've been in different sort of arenas of academics, research, and authorship. So they can find me. But email would be the best way to get a hold of me.
That's tremendously generous of you that, you would give your email out for people to contact you. And you know what, there's so many people that are hurting out there that just need guidance and direction. And I think it is our role and and responsibility when we do hold some not that again, not anything is a magic bullet, but all of us kind of chipping in to try to help each other in the areas that we've spent our lives working in those areas like you have. It's amazing to be able to give back to society. And my mission, I just want to get the word out on like amazing things that people like you are doing, because I just think that you talk about empowerment. We have to get some of this stuff out. Like I had no idea that we were supposed to supervise our kids when they're 4 years
Yes.
old watching Tom and Jerry. So that ship has flown. So maybe I gotta.
Especially Tom and Jerry, remember,
I
especially,
love Tom.
or
Yeah, man, you
Roadrunner
just.
for that matter.
Oh my
Roadrunner.
God, It's interesting that with the violent traumas and those drops that he takes, I mean, you're talking about coming off of cliffs. I mean, how many, hundreds and hundreds of feet, if not 1,000 feet up, and they're fine, right? They just flatten
Yeah,
out. They just get
exactly.
up and walk away.
Well, I
No.
can't help it but to say, and this is all theory based, it's not something I'm coming up with. Children of 3, 4, and 5 years of age have difficulty differentiating between
Yeah.
reality and appearances. Believe me, this is what they do. So we have to be right there with them, guide them so that they can get out of this, what we call egocentrism, which is not really being selfish, is because self-centered, because their brain map is very limited. All the clusters of thought processes have not been connected yet. It's not their fault. It's biology. So we have to help them hold their hands, understand, and discuss. Part of media literacy education is that it teaches the adults how to interpret media messages to different age groups. If your child is 3 years old, if your child is 12 years old, because we know you cannot now tell your 12-year-old, this is bad for you, shut it down. They're not going to listen to you. As a matter of fact, they're going to go and do the opposite. So the way you would share these media messages with your child, it has certain skills that is age-based related. And these are just the skills. Anybody and everybody, any parent can be empowered, and any parent can actually take matters into their hands and do the best for their child.
Oh, that's awesome. I'm probably going to be, when my wife watches this podcast, I'm probably in a lot of trouble because I'm sure, she was one that she would read all the psychology books and do all this and that. But now when they're, now when the kids are around their surgeon dad, like, yeah, Tom and Jerry or whatever they're watching, that's great. No problem. So I'm sure that they were supervised when they were around her and not so much around
I'm
the
sure.
busy, especially at that time. I was like in the beginning of my practice, we're so preoccupied with what's the next day of surgery and things like that before you're seasoned. And so, but thank you for all the amazing information on today's show. I know that people are going to absolutely love this show and get a lot out of it. And they certainly, for anybody that has questions, please ask us questions on the links you're going to see. You'll see a lot of short videos that are going to come out of here and then the actual podcast itself. And we're happy to answer any questions that you might have. But until next time, it's been an absolute pleasure to have Dr. Jafari on the show today. I mean, just a tour de force, which I knew it was. I thought we should book 4 hours for this, but, we kind of condensed it down reasonably well. But anyway, it's great to see everybody. See you all again on the next Wellness at the Speed of Light podcast. Hope you enjoyed this episode and see you on the next one.